Welcome to the Ripened Heart podcast, where we explore the depths of the human psyche through the lens of homeopathy, human design, and astrology for soul-deep healing. Each episode will feature vulnerable and thought-provoking conversations highlighting healing modalities that help us shift our perspective on what it means to be a healthy and fulfilled human being in today's world. I'm your host, Kaylee Anello. Let's dive into the podcast. Hi guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have our first official guest on the podcast, and I couldn't think of a better person than Yerasimos. He is a transformational body worker, and he's also trained in somatic experiencing, which we're going to dive into today, what that means. But he also has a background as a holistic health coach and a human design guide. So he kind of encompasses what I'm trying to do with the podcast, which is so exciting. I can't wait to dive into his journey today because I think he's just integrated natural health and human design so beautifully. And he's just an amazing educator and really, really helps people to overcome, their disempowering behaviors and the things that are holding them back in their lives. And so I would love for Yerasimos to tell us a little bit about himself and to spring us off here. Hi, Yerasimos. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Hi, Kaylee. Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and I'm so excited that you're doing this podcast. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I came across you on the Unslayed podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And you and your wife, Sophie, did a show on Bodywork and your experience with that. And I just found it so inspiring. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, wow, I want more people to hear about this modality because I just don't think it's talked a lot about in the world of natural health about, how all of these traumas and life experiences are stored in the tissues. And, even if you eat healthy and take a bunch of supplements and do all the right things, sometimes there's still things that can hold us back unless they're processed out of the body in a proper way. And so that's what really drew me to your work initially. And then I saw that you had started doing human design. I was like, oh my gosh. So I followed you on Instagram and we connected over DM. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, we're just so like-minded. I was so excited that you added that to your practice. And so tell me a little bit about what got you into natural health in the first place.
I like to tell stories, so I might have to start from the beginning.
Please
With
do.
this
I
one.
would love to hear your story.
So I had a really traumatic birth. So
Really?
obviously I didn't remember it consciously, but
Yeah.
my mom, she couldn't feel me for a few days, and I had my uncle from Greece who was staying with them in Bayonne, New Jersey. So this is like 40 years ago. And he just brought her to the hospital, and it was just an emergency C-section. I wasn't getting any nutrition. The doctor said that if I was in her womb for another few hours, I would have died.
Wow.
So, that was my first experience with life on this planet.
Yeah.
And I know different people have their own views on birth trauma, and I was born a month premature as well. But I think because I had health issues as a child, the doctors at that time, some were telling parents not or mothers not to breastfeed
Yep.
and to use formula. And so my mom was on the receiving end of that. So not only did I have a traumatic birth, I was born 1 month premature. I wasn't born through the vaginal canal. My mother didn't breastfeed me. So I would say like my immune system started off maybe not with the best start.
Mm-hmm.
And then unfortunately, I had an adverse event from vaccines as a child. Their otitis media is listed as a side effect on many vaccines, which is chronic ear infections. So I had chronic ear infections that then led to tubes, which then I found out that I also had a benign growth behind my eardrum. It's something known as
Really?
cholesteatoma. which is it's a collection of skin cells that keeps growing. So it's not cancerous, but it behaves in a similar way. So obviously, as these skin cells keep growing, they can cause damage to the delicate structures within the ear canal. So I had, surgeries back then at 5 and 7 years old to remove this. So I think on some level, I had this story within myself, like something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Like something's wrong. I'm broken. I need to fix myself. Now, fortunately, for whatever reason, maybe it's my human design, maybe it's some, way I was raised, or other esoteric factors. I don't think I allowed that to get me into like a victim mode. It actually ended up motivating me to want to learn more and grow more, and I don't really like saying this, but like fix myself,
Yeah.
like work on myself. And
How do we transform this experience into something positive?
yeah, exactly. And because of all the surgeries, I had like scar tissue in my ear, the cilia were permanently damaged. So I have had like 50, 60% hearing loss in my right ear since I was like, a toddler, like 5, 6
Yeah.
years old. So, that was something that I always carried with me. Now, granted, I'm one of the lucky ones. I didn't have like major, major health issues, but it was still, at 5 years old, uh, you're being wheeled into an operating room. You don't know what the hell's going on. You're taken away from your parents. It was really, really, really scary. You know, and
Yeah.
yet
And
I held a lot of that in because I have. You could, if you were going to say something.
oh, yeah, I was just thinking because, they say that so much of your neurology is wired in the first 7 years.
Yeah,
So that's like how your brain was set up in that way of like you were saying, what's wrong with me? What's going on here? Why is my experience of life this traumatic?
for sure. And like you bring up a good point. There's a lot of a lot of people don't focus on even the 9 months in utero and those first few years on what the environment is like. What's the home life environment like? What's the psychology and health of the mother, during those 9 months and those first few years. And so that, it definitely had an effect on me. And, I had one of my earliest memories is being wheeled into the operating room and one of the nurses being, oh, I'm like fighting back tears, like trying to be strong, and was like, you're really, really brave. And I think now there's benefits of that, but I also think like I kept things in to just kind of show my strength. Anyways, so I went through, the things I had to deal with around that. But having that kind of story within me of like, yeah, something's wrong. I need to fix myself, you know, carried me through my life and definitely motivated me. And I was an athlete growing up. I played a lot of different sports. I was interested in a lot of different things. But I would say, what was a big turning point? I I think it was when I was in college. I studied abroad in Australia. I spent a semester in Sydney, and I just started reading more and meeting people from all over the place and traveling around a little bit. And I don't know, I made a decision then that I was going to backpack Europe after college.
Oh, wow.
So I took all my savings, and when I graduated college, before I got my like first job, which was a corporate hotel job, I I just packed a suit. I packed books with me, and I traveled in a backpack and just started reading and allowing my mind to go wherever it went. So
Yeah.
it began the process. Like once I left the academic system, is actually where my real education began.
Yeah.
I was able to like do well in school because I had the ability to regurgitate and repeat information. So I was successful
Mhm.
in the conventional academic system. But when I allowed myself to kind of be drawn towards the things that interest me, it just ultimately brought me to learning about health. But the first thing was I had always wanted to pursue an acting career when I was
Oh,
younger. So I'm
yeah.
getting I'm getting into like all the little nuggets of how one decision led to the next decision.
I love it.
And so, anyways, I got back from that trip. I worked for a couple years for a hotel company, and this was post 9/11. So I was just like, it was like a corporate cookie cutter brand. I'm really grateful for the people I met there and the learning that I had. But I left and I said, you know what? My parents are from Greece.
Mhm.
They spent a lot of time there. And the summer of the Olympics in 2004, I
Mm.
packed up a suitcase full of books and went to my parents' house I left the hotel job. I did nothing but read. And I
Wow.
was reading all different kinds of books on different subjects. And I ended up making the decision, I'm not going to move back to New York City. I'm going to start pursuing an acting career. And my first acting mentor, he was really into consciousness work. He was really
Interesting.
into understanding how you became who you were, how your personality developed, honoring that process, but then separating from, let's say, these more habitual primary ways of being and integrating more of you, kind of integrating elements from your shadow, things that have been repressed. Now, for the purposes of acting, it was so you can embody and play and empathize with more characters because you can see within yourself. You got to know these different parts of yourself that you can use in service of storytelling. Now, from a life standpoint, it really allowed me to just grow and
Yeah.
embrace more of who I was. And so I would say my earliest education around that in my 20s was that. It was like really learning about psychology, learning about myself. I got into some new age stuff, back then in my
Hmm.
20s,
Hmm.
spiritual stuff. But at that point, I also ended up doing a 1-year program in 2007 at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition.
Okay.
It's an online nutrition school now, but then they used to hold weekend classes. It was like over 10 weekends, 6 blocks from where I was in Columbus Circle in New York City. And
Really?
so someone had told me about it, and it seemed to be in line with my my love for integrative learning.
Yeah.
I've never been this person that's like find one modality or one thing and one religion and be like, this is what I'm all about. I've always been really curious. Maybe it's my Gemini nature.
Hmm.
Um, so I went through that program, and yeah, I started learning more about health and different nutrition practices and modalities. And what else? Let's see.
What drew
I
you to study nutrition in particular?
Well, I think I grew up my parents are from the old world. My parents are
Yeah.
from Greece. My mom grew up in the mountains of Greece. Like when you hear
Hmm.
those stories around like when I was old, I had to walk through snow and rain for miles to go to school. Like that was my mom's life. She
Yeah.
lived in like a 2-room shack in 5 hours north of Athens in the mountains with her siblings.
Amazing.
And she had relatives that lived to be over 100 years old, who had never seen a doctor in their life, never got any injection or medication or anything,
Hmm.
and lived to be, vibrant and healthy. So I think my mom always had that, connection to that, and she cooked great foods and healthy foods. So I grew up with home cooked foods.
Hmm.
And then I got conditioned by like growing up in the 80s and the 90s commercials and
Couple
chemicalized
catch up.
foods. Yeah, exactly. And but I think my core always had that connection to like real food and
Yeah.
nature. So yeah, I was just really curious. I'm curious about it, and at that time, this was really interesting. In the program, we would kind of touch upon different modalities. They'd talk about vegetarianism, veganism, paleo, low carb. I mean, all this stuff just to get
Mhm.
access to all of it. And I started eating even more cleanly than I had before. I was in my early mid 20s. I wasn't taking
Mhm.
care of myself perfectly, but I decided to do an experiment. I had been eating so cleanly for a few months, but I grew up in the diner business. So my dad had a
Oh,
traditional New Jersey style diner for 35 years, never closed, open all the time. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go home for a weekend. This was in New Jersey. And I'm going to just eat everything, like just unhealthy food. I'm just going to, for 3 days. It was kind of like my own mini version of Super Size Me, the documentary where he ate
yeah.
McDonald's for a whole month.
What's gonna
I
happen?
just did it for 3 days. And I shit you not, I went back into New York City that night, literally depressed. I
Really?
felt horrible.
Yeah.
I had broken up with the ex-girlfriend at that time,
Hmm.
like 7 months prior. And then for some reason that night I wasn't feeling really good. And I was like, oh, let me go
Yeah.
onto MySpace and look at her pictures again. Even though like I had ended the relationship, but I was just feeling
Yeah.
so just down and stagnant and heavy and dark.
Yeah. And
And
then
I
you
was
want
like,
to like feed that almost when you're in that state. You know what I mean? Like, let's think about more dark and depressing things. Let's look at those
yeah.
pictures.
Yeah, and it was like, but for me, it was it was this deeper light bulb moment of how what we put in our bodies, on our bodies, impact our psycho-emotional state.
Yeah, most people, I don't think they still really connect those dots.
Yeah, no, I don't think they do. So that, doing the psychological work, the self-exploration work, then bringing in the nutrition element, then realizing how my choices, my lifestyle choices impacted my body and then also impacted how I was doing emotionally. It was like
Hmm.
this like cycle, this loop. I
Yeah.
just got more interested in the body and
Yeah.
physiology. And so besides going through this program, I'm obviously a self-taught person in a lot of ways. I'm really curious. I love learning. So it was just this educational process that I went through, and then I made the decision. And I'm trying just to tell the story in a nutshell. There's always different elements to it, but I
No,
don't
I
want to
love it. You're doing
drag
great.
on and on. But I made the decision to, and maybe we'll talk about this regarding human design later.
Hmm.
But I made the decision. I just had the thought, like I was living in New York. I got a little stagnant there, and then I just had this thought, like you're gonna move to LA.
Wow.
And it was a fuck yes. It
Hmm.
was like a uh-huh, like I'm there, I'm totally all about it. And yeah, I moved to LA January 2013. One of the reasons was I wanted to really see if the acting world was for me. I had been growing
Yeah.
two simultaneous paths, like personal development, health, wellness, and also performing and creativity. But I would say maybe a year after moving to LA, I just the industry has dark elements to it,
Hmm.
and I didn't feel so pulled towards it, and I wanted to keep pushing forward with supporting people and helping people. I think I had this like weird thought that I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to LA and I'm gonna be famous and I'm gonna
Hmm.
make a lot of money and then I'm gonna have a platform and then I can help people. And then one
I
day I kind of
see.
woke up and I was like,
Yeah.
well, I could just help people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was this weird like realization, and I think also, personally speaking, I think my desire to be an actor was coming also from, I mean, I love the art form, don't love the industry, but was coming from a place of wanting validation too. So
Yeah.
there was an insecurity there.
I see. It
But
makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's it for some people, not all, but for
Hmm.
some.
Hmm.
So then, after moving to LA, shortly after, I met a mentor of mine who was an ex Navy SEAL. He was trained in traditional Chinese medicine. He was an alternative healing practitioner, body worker. And he took me under his wing and taught me some cool modalities. And that's where I met my wife. My wife studied with him and worked with him as well. So we met, several years ago in a small, intimate training. And yeah, the rest is history. I've just been doing different work, working with clients, continuing my education. I got into human design around 7 years ago
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
And so yeah, it's been an interesting journey of just kind of like feeling into what feels right, and then when something doesn't feel right, making a change, making a change, making a change. And I'm very grateful with how my life has turned out so far. It hasn't been without challenges, of course, but that's how you build resilience. That's how you open up your heart. That's how you grow. And that's how it was for me.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a bit more about what you experienced in your training and what that taught you about health after coming at it from the nutrition perspective, then going based on body work and seeing that heal people in a different way. Yeah, I would just love to hear your experience with that.
Sure. Well, I think the fact that I had that experience around how much food and my life and lifestyle choices impacted me psychologically, my interest in the body became much more, it became stronger.
Yeah.
So when my journey just happened to present this person in front of me, and I had just kind of went through my own mini dark night of the soul. It was like a
Mhm.
year and a half into LA. I went through a little breakup. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with my life. Was I going to act? Was I not going to act? I was dealing with some financial anxiety. Everything hit me all at once. And
Yeah.
then I kind of came upon this like kind of underground healing community in LA, and it felt right. And I actually was hit with like a really interesting fork in the road moment. This woman who I I met in an acting workshop in New York City. She hit me up to come out to a workshop in LA to work with this teacher that we had worked with. And she's like, oh, I'm coming out to LA to work with you. And I was kind of in a little funk. I was like, all right, cool, let's do it. And at the last minute, she bailed.
Wow.
She booked like a job in New York City, and I thought to myself, I was like, well, I don't want to put this money towards that. I was kind of ready to work with you. And then the next day, Christopher, who was my mentor at the time, he kind of came into this office. I was working in their house, like his wife did this other like holistic health business, and he goes, "Hey, I'm doing a training. I want you to be in it. I want you to come."
Really?
And I went, "Yes." I didn't even know what he did. I just knew that he was like a practitioner, and he had like a revolving door of clients. And anytime I would see him, he would just be able to like kind of tune into my body, and he just kind of like knew what was going on with me. It was really
Yeah.
trippy, and he had this presence about him that I was really drawn to. So I just said yes. I put that money that I had saved for the acting workshop to this. And it was a 5-day like transformational experience. I mean, it's doing really deep physical work, body work all day, all night for 5 days with a
Wow.
small group of people. And that's also where Sophie was assisting at that. So I met her there. Well, no, I didn't meet her there. I got closer with her there.
Wow.
And it was game changing because I don't think I realized, being someone who's been into health and
Mhm.
taking care of themselves, I didn't realize, I think, the amount of stress and anxiety that was stored in my body, that was stored in my tissues.
Yeah.
So I remember this one moment in the training where I was getting worked on, which is one of the main techniques is using your feet with deep rhythmic pressure and walking on different parts of the body that correlate with the Chinese meridians while you're doing deep breath work. And I was getting worked on, and my pain levels were super high, which to me were correlating with a high level of tension, stress, toxicity, and trauma that's stored in the body. And I just something released, and there was just this like weeping, heaving process that happened for 20 minutes, like,
Wow.
and there was no story attached to it. And after I got up from there, it felt like, I don't know, it felt like a rebirth of sorts. So that just was another signal of like, holy shit, like this body that we experience the world through, it stores our history, it stores the wounding, the trauma, the pain, the emotions that we haven't expressed. And I was fascinated.
Yeah.
So I kept doing more and more of the work, continuing my own process of healing and getting more present. And yeah, it was just a really powerful experience, and I wanted to integrate it into the work that I did and make it a big piece of my work with people because, like you mentioned, somatic work is getting more popular, but it's still not a thing that people turn to outside of like maybe taking yoga class or working out at the gym,
Yeah, exactly.
or maybe
Yeah.
getting like a more conventional massage.
And so I'm curious, through your journey with that, did you find that you would have memories come up as well, that you would actually remember certain experiences?
You know, there was. I'll just share the first thing that comes to me. Yes, to answer your question, but I remember one time I worked with Sophie because that's how we started trading the work, and
Yeah.
after the training, and became really close friends for 6 months. And the work can go really really deep because a lot of stuff
Mhm.
comes up. So she had put me in this one position. So there's the work where you're getting walked on,
Mhm.
which we call the soma somp technique. Some people call it moshing. And there's also some resistance stretching and resistance flexibility work that you do that helps kind of break down accumulated dense fascia and scar tissue and get the blood, the lymph, and the chi flowing through the body. So Sophie put me in this one position that worked on the kidney meridian. And the kidney meridian, there's associations with fear there as well.
Mhm.
So after I got out of it, and there was a lot of pain in there, after I got out of it, my body just went frigid, like super
Wow.
cold. Like I was freezing. I had like 4 blankets over me, and it didn't matter. And I felt like I went back to what it was like being a child when I was scared of the dark.
Really?
And I remember like even my voice changed. I was kind of like talking like I was a 7-year-old. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm scared, like it was trippy,
Wow.
and my wife has had her own experiences with that, and I've actually worked with clients who have had memories of sexual abuse come up, or other things, maybe an argument or something that happened
Sure.
with someone in their life, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you were talking about your experience, like being born and that trauma, that's kind of what made me ask you that question, because that's another thing that people don't usually connect to their story of like how important the birthing process is and like how that went, because that's something that we ask a lot about in homeopathy, because there's a certain class of remedies called the matridonal remedies, which
Mhm.
translates to gifts of the mother. So they're remedies that are made from umbilical cord, and you can even make it from, folliculinum, like estrogen, like all the things that are involved in the birth process.
Wow.
And it's people who will spontaneously in the homeopathy interview that can be up to like 2 hours the first time, you're just telling your story, and
Yeah.
they'll just spontaneously start talking about their birth and like, oh yeah, like I was stuck in my mother's womb, or like I had to have a C-section. And you know I've noticed that some of the patients that I've seen, they'll remember their birthing process in something like craniosacral therapy or body work. Like they'll just spontaneously remember, like, oh my God, like I can see myself in the birth canal and I'm scared and I need to get out.
Yeah. I personally haven't experienced that, but I know, like
Yeah.
you said, I know many people who have. And it's
Yeah.
funny now that you brought that up. I didn't even mention it, but it's something I've talked about and I speak out against, and I have often. Is I was also circumcised,
Oh
so
yeah.
that
Yeah.
is a crazy trauma that we inflict on baby boys in this country and some other countries, but not most of them,
Mm-hmm.
and has been going on for a really long time. So that's something that is registered and recorded in your nervous system. So it's
Mm-hmm.
pre-verbal trauma. There are different practitioners. I'm not going to sit here and say my expertise is in pre-verbal trauma. There are other
Mm-hmm.
practitioners that focus more on that, but it's a real thing. And
Yeah.
this is energy that gets stuck in your nervous system. You're talking about a high sympathetic charge. And the crazy thing with babies or anyone else who's restricted in their movement, because what they do with babies is they put them in this kind of like medieval looking chair where they strap their
Yeah.
arms and they strap their legs. And so yeah, I mean it gets me pretty angry talking.
100%.
Well, it gets me angry. I'm just like, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah.
There's
What
no
is
real
that?
medical reason for it. And so when you think about it, if your arms are strapped down, your legs are strapped down, you're not allowed to like move through things. So when they do it, and they for a long time um, they wouldn't even use anesthetic, because up until I think the early 80s, the kind of ruling paradigm was that babies didn't feel pain,
Ugh.
which is insane to me. And actually, some doctors, a baby would maybe like make this gesture, but then like go to sleep. But in
Mm.
reality, they were not going to sleep. They're disassociating because
Oh
of the
my
intense
God.
pain.
Yeah.
Um, so, anyways, that just made me think of that's something
Absolutely.
that. So who knows? Maybe some of that anxiety and that pain and that stress that's been stored in my tissues, because chemicals get released when you're going through
Yeah.
things, and a lot of times they get stuck. Now I can't speak on it like super scientifically.
No, 100%.
You know what I
And I
mean?
think it's interesting, just from my experience observing in homeopathy, it's interesting how those similar experiences, like somebody can have the exact same experience as you did, in birth, and it'll manifest in such a different way. For some people, they're claustrophobic because it
Yeah.
reminds them of being in the womb or in the birth canal. Like they can't go into a dark tunnel. Or for some people, it's just social anxiety, and or it's headaches and seemingly so unrelated.
Hmm.
But as they tell their story and you start to connect all the pieces, you're like, wow, like do you realize the impact that all of that had on you? And then moving forward into childhood, it all starts to like manifest in such a hyper specific way. And so I just, I'm always just speaking out on that, about how those core experiences, it doesn't mean that they're going to inhibit you forever, not at all. But as soon as you have awareness around the impact those early experiences can have, the sooner that you can understand yourself better and your own psychology better, and then you can do something about it and you're not acting unconsciously anymore.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, because I think that's been a big thing for me around like wanting to know things and learn things, because I've grappled with my own issues, like I've had my own dance with sex addiction when I was
Mhm.
like when I was younger, and
Mhm.
like I always think like trying to connect the dots, like, oh, I wasn't breastfed, it's like
Yeah.
is there this deep hunger, this need to be satiated that I didn't
Yeah.
get as a child. That being said, I think what helped mitigate maybe me not having more issues that I had a really loving, nurturing Greek mom. So
Yeah.
I think like, yes, I went through birth trauma. Yes, there was some vaccine injury there. Yes, I wasn't breastfed. Yes, I was circumcised, which is like fucking a lot. And
Yeah.
yet there was love, there was
Mhm.
love. And I think there's a healing capacity to love, and connection and contact and touch, which is a whole nother topic.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, because, that just reminds me because some people, jumping into human design a little bit, when you have emotional authority, which basically means you have a defined solar plexus in human design, the channel that you can have if you have your solar plexus connected to the heart center, it's like that's the only thing that's really going to calm your emotional wave is touch.
mhm.
So I found that super interesting how, 51% of people have emotional authority. And so they're not all going to have that channel, but there's something about, either their lack of connection with others will set off an emotional wave or it'll help to, smooth it out sooner.
Did you say the solar plexus connected to the sacral? What did you say?
To the heart center. So
Got
it's
it.
the 3740 channel.
Yeah, Sophie has that channel. My wife has
Yeah.
that channel. I
So
have the
that's
fifth.
so interesting because her whole thesis is on touch.
Yeah, she's all in touch, which hopefully you two will get a chance to chat about that.
Yeah, I would love
Uh,
to. So I just
um,
find it fascinating the different ways that shows up and how, it's like again, that's why I love human design is like it's just another way to objectively observe yourself
mhm.
and to look at, what are the parts in my chart that are unconscious, what's in the red color, and then what's in the black color, what's more consciously on the surface that automatically know about myself as like what we would call your personality. And how can I like go to a deeper layer again so I'm acting with conscious, intention and I'm the driving force behind my own behavior.
Ugh.
And so I'm curious then, so you said you learned human design, kind of within that same time, right, as the workshop in LA.
Yeah, you know what? The first time I heard of it was I had visited LA. I think it was like I'm wondering if it was when I came back from in 2008. I took my savings and I did a year-long backpacking trip. I
Mm-hmm.
just did that, and I came back and I stopped in LA. This was in 2009, and I had a friend of mine who was working for this like alpha bioticist. It's not like chiropractics, but it's something different. And she was working the desk, and she's like, "Have you heard of human design?" And she like looked up my chart there, and I didn't remember it. I forgot about it, but I knew that was the first point where I'd heard about it. And then yeah, I moved to LA a few years later, and then in this little community where my mentor and his wife were, they were all into human design. So that's where I first got into it. And then
Yeah.
I started learning more. I'm like, okay, I'm a generator. I'm 5'1", emotional authority. And then I just kept, self-educating and learning
Yeah.
about it. I
So
actually
what
I pulled up my chart just now just so I can
Oh
have it
yeah, yeah,
here.
I know. It's always fun to just be like, okay, what do I have that channel? Do I have this or
Yeah.
that? I do that all the time. And I'm curious because a lot of people they're either drawn more to astrology or human design or they integrate both. So is there a reason that you were more drawn to the human design system over astrology or something similar?
I think like I've always been interested very surface level on astrology. Like I
Yeah.
know my main elements,
Hmm.
but for some reason I didn't never got deep into it.
Yeah.
But then I got introduced about 8 years ago to another system that's based on playing cards, known as like medicine
Yeah.
biology or cardology or source cards, destiny cards. And I had a reading with someone, Alexander, who has a great book on it actually called Play Your Cards Right. And it blew my mind. Like so that was like really cool. And then I got to LA, and then I got into human design. And I loved human design because there's a very like nuts and bolts practicality to it
100%.
that I really like.
Yeah.
like astrology's dope. It's awesome, but sometimes like, it feels a little like I don't know how
In
to
the
explain
ether,
it.
too in the ether.
Yeah,
There's
two in the
nothing to
ether.
grab onto when you look
Nothing
at
to
human
grab
design.
onto.
But see,
Exactly.
that's
So
what astrologers say about human design. So that's why I find it hilarious.
it's wild.
They're
So I
like,
think,
oh, this is too much information, too many things going on.
yeah, I liked understanding energy type, and then the profile was cool. But for me, obviously, the inner authority was the game changer for me.
Yeah.
Like, wow, a way to really tune in on how to make the right decisions for me. I mean, shit, I'm an emotional authority. There are times where like I got fucking, hope it's okay I say bad
You're
words on your
fine.
podcast. I
Yeah.
got fucking heated, and I would just go off, or like someone would send me an email and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna tell this person how I feel right now, you know. But like
That's classic.
when I learned that this was my decision making process, it gave me the permission to just chill,
Yeah.
like wait,
Take a
I,
walk.
yeah, take a walk, like, you know, allow yourself to go through the wave, through the process, come
100%.
back to a more grounded center place, which is actually also doing the trauma work and the healing work and nutrition. All this stuff has allowed me to hold a greater container for emotions, to be more resilient, to be more present, which has
Yeah.
supported me in my decision making.
That's so key because, I don't think we have to be like at the mercy of our emotional waves. You know what I mean? Like you have to know how to mitigate them and know that they're going to happen. Like I think I've been thinking about this a lot, how everybody has specific things that are going to trigger their wave. There's certain things like, for me, when I have to make a decision that's going to require a significant financial investment,
Mm,
I am so indecisive and I go through the wave sometimes multiple times before I actually put the money down for it. And a lot of times there's deeper reasons like, oh, I'm afraid of the change it'll involve. It's more than the money, but I feel like everybody needs to kind of understand what is going to trigger them more in their emotional wave and to have that understanding so that they can give themselves more time and space to make the decision,
yeah.
like kind of know ahead of time and know like, okay, maybe I should do something like schedule a somatic therapy massage. I haven't had one in a while. I've never tried body work. Maybe I need to work on my emotions outside of my, decision making process or when shit hits the fan or, so that again, you kind of develop that your own emotional intelligence and
Yeah.
like how you operate specifically because even if you have um the solar plexus open, like even if you don't have it defined, which is the center of emotions, you're going to pick up on other people's. And with the collective up in arms emotionally every single day, the second you go on Facebook or Instagram, you're going to feel all that regardless of if it's yours or not. So you're going to have to gain some sort of emotional intelligence and healthy sense of detachment
Yeah.
regardless.
You know, that's actually I'm happy you brought that up because it's a question I have with human design, that someone who's a non-emotional, let's
Yeah.
say, they're picking up stuff from other
Yeah.
people. So in essence, they need to kind of get like almost like get clarity too before
Mm-hmm.
making a decision out of like let's say
Yeah.
a non-emotional generator. Their
Yeah.
decision making process is the sacral. But if
Yeah.
they're, you know, amplifying and riding someone else's emotional wave, like that may cloud their sacral. Is that correct?
Exactly. And like, let's just say hypothetically, let's say they also have an open ego center. So it's like if there's somebody in the room who they want to please, that's going to cloud them too. And they're not going to
Mm,
be able to make an instant sacral yes. Or maybe their sacral is responding with a yes, but they can't hear it because all they're thinking about is, well, what does this person want from me?
gotcha.
Or oh, this person's going to be upset because that because they feel the emotion so strongly through that open center and amplify them, they can have the tendency to like predict people's reactions to them, and so they kind of walk on eggshells sometimes because they don't want to engage in that conflict because it feels really really heavy.
Mm,
And so absolutely, like, most of us don't live alone, and when we're faced to make decisions, usually it's because somebody else is in the room asking us to decide. And so that always has to be considered. And of course, you're not going to know everyone's design, but I think at a certain point you can just feel it like, oh, somebody's triggering my emotions. Like, maybe I'm not seeing this clearly. Maybe I also need time. So it's like for me with human design, you really just, as long as you feel into your own body, the rules don't matter. You have to have a foundation of your design, but I'm never dogmatic about like, well, this means this, so you don't feel that way. You know what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean?
No, that's the thing that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. That like
Yeah.
there's certain basic rules or formulas, but it's way more nuanced. Which so is life, you
Yeah,
know. Like that's life
exactly.
for
And
you.
I don't like some of the, honestly, sometimes the language or the rhetoric around human design, it's like you need to act correctly. Do you know what I mean? Like some of
Yeah.
that language where
Hmm.
it's like boxing somebody into something else about like where they almost like take notes and it's like they have to meet all these bullet points. Like I'm a generator, which means I need to do this, 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 and this. And so instead of acting authentically, which is the purpose of human design, they act how they think a generator should.
Yeah.
Or like I'm a projector, which means this. They get it in their head. It's not the system's fault. It's just like it's easier to have this like guidebook that you get and then you can at first you can kind of cling to it as like a set of rules you must follow,
Hmm.
you
Totally. I mean,
know?
I think that's definitely how I think I was in the beginning.
Yeah,
But
and I think
I've
it's kind of natural in a way to do that when you're getting your bearings around it. But it's just like honestly everybody has there's so much nuance and there's so much more to a design than energy type, strategy, and
hmm
authority.
hmm
And everybody's going to have like their thing that they're going to struggle with within their chart. And it depends because, different life stages and different circumstances are going to trigger different, what we would call not self themes in your chart. So it's always kind of evolving and changing with you. And I think ultimately the purpose is to kind of transcend the information and just live as yourself and just leave it behind. That's how
yeah.
I see it.
Yeah, same here. And another reason why I think I'm really into somatic work and physical work and health is because, again, like you have this body graph, you have this chart. Like, how can you hear the wisdom of your design if you're clouded with toxicity, if you're clouded with trauma, and if if you're not connected to your physical body, especially when you think about inner authority, they're not mental processes.
No.
It's subconscious. It's of the body in a sense. So if
Yeah.
you're a splenic type, like I feel like you need a clear channel. Like you need
Yeah.
to be able to really tune into that. But if you're like eating shitty food, if you're getting fucked up all the time,
Hmm.
you're not getting good sleep. Like you're not. I don't want to say you're not, but it's going to be much more difficult for you to really tune in, for a person to tune into that deep level of wisdom.
Because it is automatically going to be like something, it's like you had said so beautifully earlier, when you ate that food that your body was no longer adapted to, it affected your thinking process. So it's like if you're doing that, you're automatically going to go to the head quicker than
Yeah,
you usually would, and you're going to get lost in the mental loop and lose that feeling,
yeah,
because it's
and
almost
yeah. Yeah, and like obviously it triggered a wave in me, but then I
Mhm.
I didn't know this at that time. I wasn't
Mhm.
dealing with it, so I went into like, oh, how do I behave from my not self mind, as they say sometimes, and I was just like,
Mhm.
what the fuck? Like,
Mhm.
no, this isn't good. This isn't
Mhm.
good. So, but learning about emotional authority for me and waves just really supported me in like when I had my blue moments, like when I was
Mhm.
feeling blue, that this too shall pass.
Absolutely.
Like it's okay. Like one of my favorite poems is The Guest House by Rumi. I've shared it before.
Oh,
Have
I
you ever
haven't
read it
heard that
before?
one.
Can I find it real quick and read it?
Please, yeah, please read it for us. That'd be amazing.
I love it in general for all humans, but I also it resonates as an emotional being.
Hmm.
Um, and it's all about like treating all the different emotions and parts of you like a guest in your home instead of pushing down, repressing, etc. And I think allowing yourself to feel their feelings allows you to move through waves in a much more graceful way.
100%.
So let me see if I can find it. It's not very long, but I think you and your audience would like it.
Oh, 100%. And while you're looking for that, I was looking at your chart too, and I think the wave that you have connected to the sacral is set off by relationships
Mm,
with others. So I find it interesting. Your story was like literally about an ex-girlfriend.
yeah, well, that makes sense because
Hmm.
most of my emotional triggers are around definitely around
Others.
relationship. It's
Yeah.
not usually around like other just things going on in life that much. It's usually someone either like I don't know, just someone triggers me or says
Mhm.
something or blames me for
Mhm.
something I didn't do, or like, my wife, I mean, we're married, like we
Of
have our little,
course.
we trigger each other's waves.
Of course.
That's definitely probably my main thing is
Yeah.
relationships. So that's cool. That's really cool. So this is the poem. It's called A Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's
Oh,
so, so pertinent because, you know, the knee-jerk reaction with some of the trickier emotions is just to be like, I need to get rid of this immediately. How do I do that?
yeah. Yeah. And, I think as humans, we're kind of hardwired to go after pleasure and run away from pain. But
Mhm.
I think a more accurate question should be like, well, what pain should I allow myself to sit with and work through and feel? And what pleasure should I not be going after? Because, a
Mhm.
lot of times we're looking for the thing, our self-soothing mechanisms, our addictions, or whatever it is, to not feel the feelings. And it's like, if we just allowed ourselves to feel certain things, what would that do?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've just noticed, for those who know astrology, we're in the season of Aries, which is very fire oriented. And so the emotion that I'm seeing come up in the collective a lot is irritation and anger,
Mm-hmm.
especially as, more and more people are out and about. They're starting to kind of come out of their homes, and there's road rage, there's people being triggered, there's
There's mask Nazis and Karens everywhere.
yeah, there's a lot of people who have a lot of pent up frustration, and it's all coming out. And it's like, I just find that interesting because that's one of the big emotions that is so taboo in our culture is like anger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nope, only crazy people are angry. Like, I'm not going to punch a wall. You know what I mean? It's like we have this archetype of like an angry person that must, that's scary. And I can't feel
Yeah.
that way.
Especially with women, I think
Yeah.
women, are raised like, okay, be a good little girl, whatever,
Yeah.
and for boys, and these are general stereotypical,
Of
but for boys,
course.
it's like, well, don't cry, don't be weak, don't be
Mhm.
vulnerable, at least
Mhm.
maybe in the old days. But anger is such a powerful life force.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's such powerful energy, and it just made me think of this workshop I did. My acting teacher was really heavily influenced by these two psychologists, Doctors Hal and Sidra Stone. They developed something called voice dialogue, the psychology of the selves, and the aware ego process. So it's a way of like kind of dialoguing with different parts of yourself, and that we have these primary ways of being, and then we repress opposite energies within ourselves. They did a lot of work with dreams. So I had done about 11 years ago, and Hal, unfortunately, he passed away at 93 this past year, but he lived a pretty great life. But I had done a training with them in NorCal, and we did some dream work. And there's a reason I'm bringing this up, because very often our dreams, if we remember them, they can share aspects of ourselves that maybe we've repressed or we've ignored. And so this one practitioner, this psychologist that was there, she had a dream about Hitler.
Wow.
Hitler came to her in her dream, that archetype.
Mhm.
And so I remember Hal going to her like, okay, well, what if we took that Hitler energy, you know, chopped it up into a bunch of little pieces, threw it in a big pot, boiled it down, and took a little homeopathic dose of it and put it under your tongue? How would it help your life? And she
Oh my
said,
gosh.
she said, I'd actually be able to set more boundaries. I'd be able to stand up for myself. I'd be able to handle confrontation. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of
Incredible.
these things that we're afraid of from these primary conditioned selves. We judge that opposite. But if we're
Yeah.
able to integrate the gift of the opposite, it's not
Yeah.
about becoming Hitler,
No,
becoming
of course
ruthless,
not.
but it's like, where is that? How can that life force support you?
Yeah.
and there's something about being able to just even say, no, you will not treat me this way, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to like getting to a shouting match, or completely like falling back into like, like a weak cowering mode. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, where is that middle
There was a
way? Where is
buildup that
that?
happened prior to that
Yeah,
that was ignored.
for sure. And it's like, I remember as a kid, like I had dreams of like scary animals coming after me. And so it's like, there's this process of your personality developing. You push some things to the unconscious, some instinctual energies get pushed down, because as kids, it's like, oh, kids like experience the whole rainbow of emotions. They can go from
Yeah.
freaking like almost like demonic anger to laughing to crying to all this stuff.
They
And
just
yet,
let
of
it
course,
all out.
they let it out. But of course, depending on the family, the culture, the school you're brought up in, certain
Mm-hmm.
behaviors are approved of and
Mm-hmm.
others are not approved of. And so that, along with whatever your human design is, your astrology, your
Yeah.
numerology, all that whole process, like, determines your personality in
Yeah.
essence. And
Yeah.
so how can we reclaim these lost aspects of ourselves because of we've been conditioned to be a certain way? And I think human design, I think body work, I think eating
Yeah.
well and healthy supports this process.
100%. And, I love dreams. As a studying homeopath, every single session will ask people, what have you been dreaming about?
Cool.
Because the whole thing with homeopathy is we're trying to get to your uncompensated state. Who are you at your core behind all the layers of conditioning? And so, dreams have no filter. They're not, you can't control dreams, which is
Mm-hmm.
why, they can be quite terrifying. And then I find that people just stop remembering them completely. But once they connect back to that world and they start keeping a dream journal, and they will see, wow, I keep having these recurring themes come up over and over and over again, or that ex that I thought was over, that I was over, they're coming back to me in my dream again. Like, why? And so it's so interesting because it's like, I think automatically as a client, whether, you're coming for a reading or you're coming for body work or homeopathy, you're unconsciously wanting to present yourself in a certain way. And it's scary to do any modality that's going to kind of strip away the mask from you
Mm-hmm.
and reveal what's actually going on underneath the surface, because that's the only way that you heal is through awareness. And so we say in homeopathy, like half the healing comes from the session and the other half from the actual remedy, because people start to see themselves and their patterns in a new way. And they're like, wow, I never realized that about myself. I never realized that there was all these connections. And like, yeah, I do notice when I don't speak up for myself that I have dreams about Hitler. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, it's that archetypal energy, like tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, there's something we need to look at that you're not willing to look at in your conscious waking life.
Yeah. And a lot of these darker characters that show up in our dreams are, again, they're showing us that we haven't integrated these more instinctual energies.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it made me think of a really great quote, one of my favorite quotes from Jung. And Jung used to call dreams messages from God.
Yeah,
So
I
I just
love
think
that.
that's a beautiful thing. And his very well-known quote is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
I love that quote. That is
and
100% true.
and it's like, the work is the work, it's the inner work,
Yeah.
it's getting to know yourself. Human design, astrology
Mm-hmm.
supports that process. It's working through your traumas, it's doing body work, it's working with the tissues, it's eating healthy. I mean, it's this whole process
Yeah.
of shedding away stuff that doesn't belong to you, or separating from what doesn't belong to you, and integrating elements that maybe you've left behind along the way. And I think one of the big reasons why people forget their dreams, and I've had an interesting relationship, I forget them, I don't, is what you said. It's important to give intention to it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm gonna have a dream journal. The other thing is too, like, people are getting jacked up on different chemicals, they're not getting proper
Yeah.
sleep, they're living in these cities,
Yeah.
they're being brought further and further away from nature.
Yeah.
So how can you communicate with these highest aspects of your nature if you've completely said no and turned off and turned away from nature? I feel like
Yeah.
there's a dance there. I mean, when I've gone camping,
Oh my God, the
my
dreams that
my
come.
my dreams are just like
They're off the
insane.
walls. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I know
it's
it's fascinating, and that's why, like, that's one of the big reasons I wanted you on the show is I am so passionate about incorporating some sort of, body work or something that works on the physical body in addition to things like human design and astrology, because it's so easy for it to be mind candy
yeah.
and for you to just get more into your head, like I was kind of alluding to earlier. But if you incorporate the body in some way and you really, really work on it outside of these modalities, then they tend to pair together beautifully and each feeds into the other.
Hmm.
And it's just like, I just think they're the best pairing. And I think you kind of need both.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And in essence, again, there's another great quote that Jung talks about where it's just like we separate the two
Hmm.
just so we can talk about them and understand them. But in essence, we're really like this lived body. We're like a mind body,
Yeah,
and obviously doing some mental work supports the evolution and growth of the body and vice versa. And it's just important to tackle it from different access points. There's just something to
exactly.
say about like getting your calves and your hamstrings and other parts of your body walked on with deep breathing work and working with the tissues in a way like you're bypassing the mind. I do
Hmm.
that, like conscious mind, and you're kind of diving directly into the subconscious. You're looking at the body as a shadow. So when you
Hmm.
work, when you manipulate the body, you're going directly into the unconscious.
Hmm.
And I would say like a big piece of the work that I do from a somatic standpoint is probably related and based on some of the original work and understandings from Wilhelm Reich. I
Oh yeah.
consider the work I do really Reichian.
Yeah.
He took the psychological architecture that Freud and Jung talked about, like the ego, the superego, the id, etc., and applied it and kind of transposed it on the physical body, with the skin being the ego, the musculature being the superego, the deeper core energetics being the id. And so I
Yeah.
think the more we work with the bioenergy and alter it with different practices, whether it's really deep body work, whether it's really altering your posture through other modalities out there, that can have a really big impact on you, on your sense of self, and what comes up to the surface to be experienced and processed. So it's
And
been
I
a
think it's
it's been a never-ending humbling experience.
100%. And I think it's, I always connect it back to homeopathy just because that's a lot of my clinical
Yeah,
experience. And
it's
it's like,
amazing.
you always have to find the opening for each person. Where can you get in there? And for some people, they're going to automatically be drawn to one or over the other. And I find that a lot of people, what's so interesting about hearing people's stories in this setting is you can tell that they've never spoken about these things with another human.
Hmm.
And they're not used to even being introspective. And this is just overall in general, not everybody at all. But that's why I think it's great to have, okay, so if you're not used to being introspective, something like digging into your design, digging into yourself, maybe that's something that would be really helpful. So you can start that process of like, yeah, where was I conditioned? What was my upbringing like? How do I respond to my emotions? Do I have trouble making decisions? Like anything that kind of starts that internal process for somebody. And that access point where they need to start is going to be so different based on, their personality and what they're open to and their experiences.
Well said. Well
Yeah.
said. Again, the quote that I love, little quotes, they come to me,
Yeah.
is know thyself. One of the
Yeah.
simplest quotes out there. And then how do you choose to know yourself? And there's different modalities to support that
Hmm.
process. But there needs to be, if you want to not allow the things that don't get integrated to become fate in your life,
Yeah.
referencing the previous Young statement, you have to do that inner work.
Yeah.
You have to go in and ask those questions and dig deep. Like, oh man,
Yeah.
like what, like in my 20s, I grew up in a pretty old school Greek family. Like my dad
Hmm.
is like the stoic Greek man,
Hmm.
patriarchal in that sense. My mom was, like the Greek homemaker. And my dad is an amazing person. My mom's awesome, but he definitely, there were some things that he did that I wasn't the most proud of it, that I
Hmm.
took on. Like I kind
Hmm.
of, when I was really young in my early 20s, like I was just like dismissive
Mhm.
dismissive sometimes to like some of the women in my life,
Mhm.
which is like, and I had to like experience that in the context of a relationship and then go, wait, and then I would go home and then I would witness it when I was
Yeah.
home and be like, oh, fuck, like I
Yeah.
do that sometimes. Like, I'm like, yo, you don't know what you're talking about. Like I did that shit when I was much younger. And
Mhm.
so it's just this process of like experiencing in the world, coming back inwards and asking the questions and searching for
Mhm.
the answers within yourself, like going out into the world, experiencing. It's like this dance between inner and outer world that's moves you along and supports you in your maturation process.
Absolutely. And, that reminds me, I wanted to dive into a little bit about your experience as a 5-1 profile, because I think you kind of articulated it right there, where the 5-1, for those who are unfamiliar with human design, first of all, you can look up your design online and see all about it. You just enter your birth information like astrology. And they say that the profile in human design is kind of like the archetype you embody, the costume that your soul wears to carry out your mission. It has a lot to do with, how you relate to the other. And some profiles, they have a much more inward journey that impacts and transforms them. And then there's other profiles like the 5-1 that kind of need the other to really get to where they can have their soul evolution that they came to have and to have the greatest impact. So it's always interesting because I'm a 2-4, so I am the more like, my personal experience, let's say being a patient of homeopathy, has allowed me to be a better practitioner and show up in the world. So that's my starting is I'm going to be alone working on myself. And I don't think that's the experience of a 5-1
Mm-mm.
so much.
No.
They're in relationship, and that's the transformation.
Yeah, and I think so much of my growth and like exponential growth has happened in relationship.
Yeah.
In relationship through, let's say, my partners in the past. Even, I've been with my wife for 6 years. We've married 2 years. There's been so much growth because there's just like, it's almost like this bouncing off. Like I'm experiencing myself in relationship with the other person, and then that supports the introspective process. And yeah, it's really cool. I don't
Mhm.
know. I listen. I like my design. I like my life. I like who I am. So I'm happy with being a 5-1. If I wasn't, then that'd probably be a problem, right? I think on some
Yeah.
level, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just cool because the 5-1, they call it like there's this projection field that happens where it's like, first of all, it's a great profile to have as an actor
Mm,
because like it has a big impact on strangers, where me, it's like the 2-4, I connect more to like a smaller niche community.
hmm
And so it's just so interesting, like how impactful the 5-1 can be as an educator, especially with your incarnation cross. And so I just love kind of like the dance of that, where it's like there is that introspective process that you had and you had to go through your internal journey, but then the relationship with others comes in and then it plays off that dynamic. Because everybody has like parts of their chart that are going to be more introverted or extroverted. Um, but I always find 5-1 so interesting because it reminds me a bit of like a manifestor energy. It's very impactful, like how they educate leaves a mark on you, you remember it. And so I find them fascinating. My one of my first mentors was a 5-1 manifester.
Oh wow.
So
Like raw.
she's somebody I will never forget. Like, she walks into a room and like everybody looks at her because they can just feel her aura. It's just so impactful. And so it's just like I see that like as a manifestor times two is how I experienced her. And
Wow.
it's like the things that she would teach people would reveal something to themselves that would just completely transform their life.
Yeah.
Just the first time that they met her. And I find that energy so fascinating.
Yeah. I One of my teachers, my bodywork teacher, he was a 5-1 MG. My brother's a 5-1.
Oh, really?
And yeah, he's a 5-1 generator. He's way more defined than I am.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really cool because we get along like super well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm fortunate for that. But yeah, the projection field, something that really learning about that helped me for
Yeah.
sure. But I think since I was born, I was projected on like my family, like in school and at sports, like um some of it good, some of it maybe not as good, having that like pressure put on me. But I definitely, through human design, have learned to really utilize my one line to build a stable foundation
Yeah.
and be able to provide things that are practical to people. Like that's
Mhm.
another element for me, that it's like I want to be able to provide something because I know I will be projected upon. Like
Mhm.
I've gotten really clear on what I say yes to, because
Mhm.
I don't want, like, it's funny when I learned about 5-1s and reputation being a big thing.
Yeah.
Like that's something that's always been with me my whole life. Like
Mhm.
there's been a fear of like saying something or doing something that's going to ruin my reputation,
Yeah.
which is why it's taken me a while to I mean, part of it is building that security of knowledge, of
Yeah.
understanding, to then go out and universalize some of the stuff I share. I share a lot of
Mhm.
stuff on my Instagram stories. I talk
Mhm.
about controversial stuff.
Mhm.
7, 8 years ago, I was more just in the process of like learning and hoarding knowledge, and I was like, what will people think? I care less about what will people think now.
Mhm.
Um, to some degree, obviously I do, but yeah, it's been interesting that I'm mindful of what I say yes to when I'm being projected upon. And I've learned to kind of cut the projection field
Mhm.
sometimes, because I've had clients and people come up to me like after a session or after working with me for a while. They're like, "Oh my God, like thank you so much. You've changed my life, and like you're amazing." And I'm just like, I received that thank you, and I'm human and I fuck up and I have my own
Yeah.
issues, because I don't want,
That's the key.
and I had a teacher who totally bought into the positive projection field as the 5-1, and let's just say it didn't turn out well, and
Yeah.
we're no longer in contact for multiple
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah, I think, and that's such a good point. And I just think that during this polarizing time, I think that the 5-1 has such a key role to play. That's what I've seen, because they are the heretic who's like,
Hmm.
not afraid to search in the corners of the internet and like get that foundation, like you're saying, and like explore those depths and then try to bring it to people in a way that is going to be understood and in a way that is going to be able to be applied into their life, and realizing, yeah, like sometimes people aren't going to like it, but hey, that's the nature of polarity, and there's going to be somebody who that impacts them in such a huge way that it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it for the people who aren't on board.
Hmm.
And so that's why I think that they're playing a more prominent role now, where it's like what your sacral is saying, yes, I need to learn about that and tell people about that because it could change their life. Some people will get angry and some people will be like, wow, thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, and I think when I learned my left angle cross of education, it really gave me more permission to share information, because it kind of was like, you're not meant to just share, you're also meant to kind of lecture, like my left angle
Hmm.
cross. So it's like, which resonated with me, because sometimes when I'm passionate about something, I just talk about it, and people that are drawn in, they're interested or they're not.
Hmm.
And it gave me the freedom to be like, listen, whoever's into what I have to say, cool, they'll be into it. And if they're not, carry on, go on, live your life.
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
So that's definitely supported me in my process, especially as I've been speaking out on certain subjects and educating about health and you know that
And I
kind of
think
thing.
that a certain intuition develops, inherent in that cross is sort of like a psychic ability to be like, is this person going to be on board or not? Is this person worth my time? Is
Yeah,
it worth trying to educate them on this, or is it better to just let it pass and let go of it? Let them come to me, maybe.
that's it right there, because I'm not always the same all the time. There are times where I'll be the quiet person in the room, like
Mm-hmm.
observing, taking things in. I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
like, this isn't the right time, or I feel into someone in a conversation and I go, I might not start talking about vaccines or start talking
Mm-hmm.
about you know COVID and this
Mm-hmm.
whole situation. Like there's a time and a place, and it's also a reason why I post primarily my stories right now, and
Yeah.
not on my feed, because I just like, I don't want to bother with back and forth sometimes with people who are committed to like judging and misunderstanding. Like
Yeah.
people who consciously choose to look at my stuff, cool. Now maybe it'll change in the future. Perhaps
Yeah.
there's like a fear of what will people think there. I don't know, maybe a touch, but most of it's just like, I got other things I need to do with my time. I'm not trying to have like someone regurgitate propaganda back to me, and like,
Yeah.
what am I gonna do? Ignore it? Yeah, I guess I could ignore it, but the feisty
Yeah.
Greek in me is like, I will not and must.
Yeah. And I think, everybody has a specific role that they're willing to do. Like some people love being that person, that first point of contact of like the total newbie of something, where they love to like debate and they love to be like, no, there's this counter study that I need to show you. And then some people are like, you know what? I'm here for the people who already kind of get it.
Yeah, and I got to that point when I was younger, on Facebook. I used to get into these back and forth exchanges. Like before I knew it, I'd spent like 5 hours like on Facebook, like arguing with someone. Like
Hmm.
what? What is that even like? No, like, but that was coming from insecurity. That was coming from a whole host of places, and it's part again of this process of
Hmm.
stepping more into your design, stepping more into
Yeah.
who you are,
Yeah.
being confident in who you are, and
Yeah.
grounded, and that comes with time, self work, education,
Hmm.
etc.
100%. Well, gosh, thank you so much for being here today. I want to be mindful of your time. And
Yeah.
as we're wrapping up here, I would just love for you to share a few practices that you really integrated in the past year that have really helped you in, these kind of weird times that are just kind of throwing everybody for a loop. So, what have you found to be the most helpful?
I like to keep it simple. I mean, we're surrounded by nature here. So leaving my devices, leaving my
Mhm.
phone, leaving my computer, and going for a walk. And as I walk, be mindful of what's happening in my body, paying attention to my breath, tapping into my senses, being aware of my environment, looking at the trees, that kind of thing. Just a simple,
Mhm.
it's like my own form of, what is it, like nature bathing or forest bathing? Is
Yeah,
that the saying? There's just something to say around that. Cooking a nice, nourishing meal for myself
definitely.
really supports me. One, I'm touch cognition in human design
Oh,
too,
cool.
and so I love using my hands to do things as well, and I love to cook. So cooking a nice meal has really supported me. Um, I mean, there are different breathing practices you can do,
Sure.
like as well. Self massage work too is
Mhm.
really beneficial. Even something as subtle as just kind of like rubbing your own, like just touching yourself.
Mhm.
We're in this whole year where we've been, I'm going to say it, brainwashed to be afraid of touch. And
Mhm.
yet touch has such an impact on your nervous system, which has such an
Mhm.
impact on your immune system and your mental and emotional life.
Mhm.
So, if you have a pet, touch your pet.
Mhm.
If you have a partner, touch your partner,
Mhm.
but like self massage,
Mhm.
intentional self massage, and as you do it, noticing what comes up in your body.
Yeah.
It's like one of such a great tool to have, is because we can get so lost in our minds and the chatter, is like, how can we bring it back to the body?
Yeah.
And that's a big piece with somatic experiencing, which is another modality, is like, how do we bring it back to the body in a lot of ways and really notice the subtleties of sensations that are happening? Because let's be real, sensation is our first language. That's how we communicate in the womb.
Mhm.
We're not like in the womb like talking English or whatever language we are to our mom. It's this symbiotic relationship through sensation, our nervous systems kind of connecting. So I think touch can, in essence, the skin is kind of the external representation of the internal nervous system. So
Yeah.
by touching yourself, I think it could be good. Or using other tools like a lacrosse ball or a hard medicine ball or whatever, to just kind of do myofascial release work and self massage work, and kind of going into those tender areas and breathing through it, engaging with maybe some of the sensation or pain that you have. I didn't say it earlier, but in Chinese medicine, they have a great saying: where there's pain, there's no flow. So
Yeah.
when we hold pain in our bodies, it's showcasing that there's this lack of flow. And so in the simplest way, with all the different things we do, how can we move from a place of stagnation to a place of flow? Eating more nutritious foods is going to bring us to a place from stagnation to flow. Doing body work is going to help support flow. Understanding yourself on a deeper level through how your energy works with human design is going to support flow. Stagnation brings disease and death. Disease and death. Movement brings forth life. So
Yep.
how can we support that movement? Um, did I answer your question at all?
Oh yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said because, I think, for those of us who are, big proponents of medical freedom and just see the state of the world, it can be, speaking of emotional wave, sometimes it's hard because you're like in the park and, you see people distancing and it's just a whole thing and the energy of it. And it's just like, I think those simple practices that are often overlooked that just ground yourself back in and get you out of that and out of worrying so much about what's happening out there and connecting you back to yourself. Like, actually, I'm fine. Everything's okay where I am right now. And that's what I need to remind myself and worry about. And sometimes just, you know, not to not be aware of what's going on, but just to not always be setting yourself off with that.
Well, yeah, and like controlling what you can control, like you
Yeah.
can control your reactions to the degree that you can. Obviously, there's certain ingrained traumas that exhibit these patterns in you, and then that's a whole nother story and a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation. How do you go about like working through that and healing your nervous system, which is I think where it all begins. Um, but yeah, I mean, one of the reasons my wife and I moved to Topanga is we were in Santa Monica, and it was just this whole last year. It
Hmm.
was kind of insane, and I obviously have different views about everything that's happening. And we just wanted to be in nature. We wanted to be away from it all. And
Sure.
LA has a different vibe, and people follow different rules here than maybe some other places. And it was pretty heavy. So
Yeah.
um, I didn't want to be in that environment anymore where I had to like have people looking at me or saying things because I wasn't wearing a mask.
And that just goes to show that, the more in alignment with yourself that you are, especially as a generator, things will come across your path that help you to get to that next level of like, okay, now it's time. That initiated, moved to Topanga.
Oh yeah.
That brought so many other riches, I'm sure, and so many, things that opened you up in different ways. And that's what I love about, just being able to trust your path as a generator specifically is like, there's going to just be things that come across your path that you respond to. And it's, things just kind of flow from there. You don't need to control every moment or every, think about the future, zoom out too far and freak yourself out. It just kind of all comes together.
Yeah, and I think intuitively, like this is something I did before I even knew human design. It supported me is that like if something like was like a should, like oh I
Mhm.
should do that, or I never really felt drawn to it. I was kind of like, well, what really lights me up? Like what am I excited by?
Mhm.
I want that, I want that, I want that, and that's what's led me on the path that I've been on. It's been a weird, wacky path, but like one yeah has led to the next fuck yeah has led to the next fuck yeah, or the next no 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 that's not for me.
Yeah.
And then so it's kind of cool realizing that, and it's actually one thing I
Yeah.
share with a lot of generators, like clients or friends. It's just like yo, like what fires you up, what
Yeah.
excites you, because when you're lit up, that's how the things that are meant for you are going to come to you.
For
in,
sure.
in, in, in a sense, that's what I think.
I think
So
you're more magnetic in that way. It's like the more that you're in that, like, I guess like the higher expression of being a generator, people feel that and they want to give you opportunities versus if you're kind of in like the moping around generator.
yeah, and again,
It's
it's like a
hard.
heaviness, it's a stagnation.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like
Yeah.
when I think about my past, when I've had those moments, like when I'm not honoring my design, or I'm like, no, nothing's coming to me, no one wants to be around me.
Exactly.
But when I'm lit up and fired up and passionate and living my design and sharing information and learning and growing, and like
It all opens up. It's
it
beautiful.
opens up. It opens up. So anyways, listen, I could always talk about a million things.
I
I'm just
know.
grateful. I'm
I
grateful
know.
to be on here. I'm so happy about this show that you're doing, and I love
Thank
the work that
you.
you do. I don't really know much about homeopathy
Yeah.
except I've taken some products, and I just think it's really cool. And your
Thank
knowledge of
you.
human design is awesome, and you're just a lovely person. And what I want to say too on that is that I love that you reached out. Like I've met I've met some really solid people that have connected with me because they saw our interview on the Unslaved podcast,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is really cool.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited because I'm potentially interviewing somebody else who's been on that podcast, and just the community around there is just amazing. I
Yeah,
just love
I
it
met
so much.
yeah I met this great guy, Joel. I think he's in Australia, who's in Michael's mystery school
Mhm.
and has started his own little company around that, on like tarot,
Cool.
astrology, and this and that. We had a long conversation on Instagram last night, and we might be doing
Wow.
some like IG lives conversations on different things. So it's
Oh,
just
I'm
like
excited for that.
it's just cool. I love
Yeah.
it.
Well, where can the people find you?
Well, on Instagram, I'm not the most tech savvy person, but I'm on
Mhm.
Instagram at Healing with Yerasimos. My website is healing with Yerasimos.com. It's a very basic one-page intro, pretty much talking about bodywork. My email address is healingwithyerasimos@gmail.com. I have a Telegram channel I don't really use too often, which is Healing with Yerasimos, but you never know. If I end up getting
Mhm.
censored on Instagram, I'll be moving towards that. Other than that, if you go to Instagram, you can see on my link tree, um, I've been doing an online event for men for the last 10 months with my friend Gavin, who's a mindset coach, and he really is into authentically expressing yourself through your voice. And we actually did our first one for women last month because
Really?
we had women who tune into our Gavin and I do a Wednesday and Friday Instagram live show called Keeping It Real, where we start with one
Mhm.
question as a point of introspection and reflection. So we found out most of our audience were women, and they were like, "You got to do one for the ladies."
Yeah.
And so we did one. It was really cool. So we're going to be altering that every month. It's a 3.5 hour experience on usually the third or fourth Saturday of every month.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's it. And if you're in LA, I do a monthly event for men. It's a retreat, which is doing really deep somatic work, and I do it up here in Topanga. So hit me up.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And yeah, I'm sure I'd love to have you back on in the future. So thank
Oh,
you so much.
definitely. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Take care.
Okay.